Welcome back to From the Region with Richard Giragosian. This week's program is devoted to a special one-issue format, where we'll examine a worrisome and a deeply troubling development in terms of more deaths within the Armenian armed forces. Non-combat deaths of young Armenian soldiers, often beaten, assaulted, and abused at the hands of their own officers. This week's program will examine in greater detail the series of distressing events in the armed forces. But we will focus on a significant set of 5 of our own proposals for alleviating the tension and fixing the situation within the armed forces. This week's program will cover a set of 5 specific proposals designed to help the Armenian Ministry of Defense overcome the challenges and fix the problems of these deaths within the armed forces. But it's important to note, especially in the month of September, marking the anniversary of independence of the Republic of Armenia, it's especially noteworthy to stress that the armed forces of the Republic of Armenia are a source of pride and patriotism. In other words, wearing the uniform of the Army of the Republic of Armenia is still a source of pride and a reflection of the better and more positive elements of Armenian society. But at the same time, public service in terms of serving in the armed forces is equally matched by the concept of public servants in terms of the officers and career military officials all the way up the chain of command that are responsible for everything and the behavior within the armed forces. In this context, the Armenian Army and its officers and the Commander-in-Chief and the Minister of Defense all share a sacred obligation to protect and nurture the soldiers, men, and officers under their command. Many Armenian families provide their sons to serve in the army with the expectation that they will be given the right amount of trust and care within this term of service. And in this context, our focus on fixing the problems in the armed forces is within a spirit of cooperation, not confrontation. But this is a painful issue, but a very critical national issue that involves honor and duty of the highest caliber and highest order. Let's look first within the broader context. The Republic of Armenia has been gravely and seriously committed to defense reform for many years. Under threat in terms of the threat of war from Azerbaijan, under threat in a region at risk because of unresolved conflicts, where the security of Nagorno-Karabakh and the security of the Republic of Armenia are not taken for granted. Within this context, Armenia has embarked on a series of remarkable and impressive reforms, including democratic oversight of the armed forces, civilian control of the armed forces, and greater transparency in procurement and defense reform. In this way, the Armed Forces of Armenia is one of the most trusted institutions. However, over the past 2 years, there has been a significant increase in the number of non-combat deaths, young Armenian soldiers and some officers killed, assaulted, and abused by their own fellow officers and soldiers. This is unacceptable in any army, but given the size of Armenia, the percentage of deaths within the armed forces is especially troubling. In fact, to be honest, more Armenian soldiers have died at the hands of other Armenian officers than have Armenian soldiers died from attacks from Azerbaijan. In other words, 3 or 4 times more Armenian soldiers die at the hands of other Armenians than those killed in combat with Azerbaijan. This is obviously unacceptable. Let's look at how to fix the problem. Defense Minister Seran Ohanyan is very serious and very professional and is committed to further professionalizing and reforming the Ministry of Defense and the armed services. But this isn't about Ohanyan. This is about accountability. This is about calling to account those in charge. In other words, decisions taken by officers on the ground should reflect a spirit of discipline that needs to be imposed and strengthened from above. In other words, Defense Minister Seran Ohanyan has a responsibility to address and tackle this problem in a sincere and resolute way. But let's not blame Ohanyan alone. There are other officials who need to be called to account. For example, the Chief of the Military Staff, Khachaturov, needs to be held to account for these actions. At the same time, the Military Inspector General, former Defense Minister Mikhail Harutyunyan, also needs to take responsibility, as does the Commander-in-Chief, the President himself, Serge Sargsyan, as a former Defense Minister. This is a question of discipline and a chain of command. First, let's look at some of the causes. The general causes of these deaths within the military are due to troubling developments in society as a whole. These include a poor or lack of accountability of officials and those in command, a poor or insufficient level of discipline within the Army. More importantly, it's also caused by inadequate professional training, development, and education. It's also a test of political will for the Armenian government to resolutely and sincerely solve this challenge. Finally, it's also due to a culture of impunity, of secrecy, and an arrogance of power. But let's not just criticize. Let's concentrate on specific proposals that could be taken and adopted by the Armenian government and the Ministry of Defense to correct the problem once and for all, and to strengthen the armed forces of Armenia, to professionally develop the army. The first proposal is the creation of a non-commissioned officer corps, sergeants. Non-commissioned officers, or NCOs, play a vital role, acting almost as a liaison between the conscripts, the ordinary soldiers, and the officers. The role of a sergeant is essential in terms of unit cohesion, but also bridging the division between the officer and the young conscript, a division of age, culture, and discipline. The creation of a new sergeant corps of non-commissioned officers would be welcome and a step forward. A second specific proposal would be the formulation and adoption of a uniform code of conduct, a series of ethics and behavioral norms governing the conduct and strengthening the discipline within the Army. In terms of a uniform code of conduct, some examples would include military ethics, where military officers serving in command should not be allowed to have enormous outside income or engage in business. These are some basic rules of most armies and militaries. But in the Armenian context, there needs to be greater attention to military ethics. One way to enforce this code of conduct would be also to have unannounced inspections and specific testing of standards, and the application of standards for everyone throughout the chain of command. A third specific proposal would be to modify and reform the promotion process. Many of Armenia's currently serving generals and senior officers acquired the rank not by promotion, but because of their past performance, because of their service during the Nagorno-Karabakh War. But to be honest, that was many years ago now. In other words, a serving commander or officer should earn his rank based on current performance, not only based on past performance years ago. In this sense, promotion and the elevation to higher ranks of commanders should be merit-based and should be earned, because a command in the military is something that is deserved and earned. It's not something given away to friends or business colleagues. In terms of the promotion process, another element that's important is monitoring and mentoring. Monitoring in terms of judging and testing the performance of commanding officers and senior officials. Mentoring in terms of having a senior officer be a mentor or a patron for a younger officer to educate and further develop, because in many ways an armed forces or an army is like a family, with discipline but with a mentoring role. Included with this system of mentoring but also monitoring of the promotion process should be a series of tests and evaluations for current serving officers. Psychological tests perhaps for new officers and recruits, drug testing for new recruits, but also physical fitness. Physical fitness tests are important for discipline and for the message the Army and those who wear the uniform send to society. To be honest, it is rather distressing to see many in uniform, both in the Army in Armenia and the police uniform, being grossly overweight or obese. This is not the sign of a good officer or a good police officer. And in this sense, this proposal may raise standards and set a new example of excellence. A fourth specific proposal is the possible creation of an ombudsman for the armed forces, designed to allow a system of appeal and to strengthen the democratic process and rule of law within the military. An ombudsman would help to provide oversight, an independent force capable of supervising and providing oversight to the Army. It would also help to bolster parliamentary engagement, where the Parliament should be more involved in studying and addressing the situation in the Army. A fifth proposal that may actually help to alleviate this problem is the idea that the Republic of Armenia should consider entering into what's called a status of forces agreement, a legal document between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, whereby Armenian soldiers and officers serving outside of Armenia within Nagorno-Karabakh have their legal rights well defined and protected. Because what happens now in cases of assault, abuse, or killings of soldiers serving in Nagorno-Karabakh, there is no legal jurisdiction available in terms of the formal judicial investigatory process. This needs to be better defined, perhaps through a status of forces agreement between Armenia and Karabakh. Finally, we need more public disclosure. In other words, the lack of information regarding investigations in this case only leads to misinformation or disinformation. In other words, if there is no public accountability or public information showing what the military is doing to investigate these cases, when there is no information, it makes it look like the military is doing nothing. And this needs to be corrected. Moreover, we see the lack of reporting fostering the misperception of inactivity. Finally, in this context, prevention is as important in these cases as prosecution, because with every death in the armed forces, the danger is that morale and discipline is slowly eroding and becoming much weaker within the armed forces. This is especially deadly and dangerous in the wake of the threat of attacks from Azerbaijan. With this set of 5 proposals, presented in a spirit of cooperation, not confrontation, not accusation, we need a general call of attention and awareness within the diaspora and within Republic of Armenia in terms of alleviating this problem and correcting the unacceptable, obviously immoral deaths of soldiers that are continuing within today's Republic of Armenian armed forces. Thank you for watching, and until next week.